Damn, that's fabulous.
Hey guys, it's Jay Tahoe here, and I wanted to preface this video by saying that if you're here, then you're likely familiar with the works of FACEandLMS and inkwellTV. So I wanted to do a video dissecting their theories a little bit and showing through logic that the facts that they claim to, prove certain things are not really scientifically plausible and to keep them academically honest. So let me also preface by saying that yes, looks do matter when it comes to human attraction, for the 1000th time. But to what extent? And what other factors, are at play? And what have FACEandLMS and inkwellTV posited as scientific fact, without showing the rest of the data, the way that a politician would sneakily, show statistics to support what they're saying, but not show other statistics, that counteract it, or show the entire sample size. That's what I want to talk about today. So how have FACEandLMS and inkwellTV misled you? Let's find out. The first thing that I wanted to address before getting to more of the major fallacies is the gross misuse of the term outlier. So here's the term outlier as defined in a mathematical sense. So as defined by khanacademy.org under the math section, an outlier is a number that is at least 2 standard deviations away from the mean. So what this means is that outliers are your bottom 2 and top 2% of the data. They account for totally 4% of the data. They are a very, very small, minute section of the data, and they're greatly separated from the average. So when using the term outliers properly, you can see that outliers are a very, very small percentage of the data, the top and the bottom. In other words, outliers in real life would be extremely rare and hard to find. They're not something that you see every day. They are extremely, extremely uncommon. So now that we're clear on the proper terminology of outlier and know how to use the word properly, let's clarify something, right? So when you go out in the real world, you see an average or a slightly below average guy with his girlfriend or his wife. It's not that uncommon of a thing. Like if you go to the mall, you'll see it plenty of times, right? And you probably know 5 to 10 people off the top of your head who are in a relationship like that. Now, if this were an outlier, this would be something you'd see maybe 2%, of the time, right? Because it would only be that top 2%. That's that outlier. How many people do you know who can run a mile in less than 4 minutes and 30 seconds? I'm going to say it's probably 1 or 2. That's an outlier. That's something that's elite, right? There's maybe 1 or 2 people out of your school. If you have 300 people in your school, there's maybe 1 or 2 people who can do that on your track team. It's extremely rare. So that's an outlier. FACEandLMS and inkwellTV greatly misuse this term. And when you go to the mall or in a public venue, you see quite the opposite. So that should tell you that the statistics they're presenting you, there's some other variables at play here that maybe they just don't have. And they'll try to rationalize it by saying, oh, it's BetaBucks or it's this or it's that. But really, to a reasonable person, that's purely conjecture. They don't understand the context of any of these relationships. So that's one thing that they're very erroneous with, and they use the term entirely incorrectly in a scientific sense. Why don't we next talk about the methodology of the research? So FACEandLMS's Chad fishing experiments that he commonly cites for how, Chad can slay on Tinder, whereas the average guy can't. And that's fine. I'm not arguing that, but his data is incomplete. I've asked FACEandLMS multiple times to show us, hey, how many swipes did Chad use total? How many women didn't respond? And also, here's the big one, is every Chad that he used was actually ripped. And this is particularly relevant here because FACEandLMS used all physically fit guys. So he doesn't actually have a control group for if it was the face or the being ripped that actually made them more attractive. He will show an example of an ugly guy who worked out, but again, those are purely anecdotal. He doesn't have any data showing, hey, a bunch of ugly guys who got ripped and got no results. He shows a couple of anecdotal examples, the very thing that he accuses us of doing, but he didn't use any fat Chads. I guess if he'd used someone with a good facial aesthetic and they were fat, do you think the results would have been the same? Now, black pillars often say that gym maxing is just cope and, doesn't actually make any difference in your attractiveness. But ironically, Face and LMS may have actually proven that gym maxing is actually one of the more important factors because he didn't use any chads that were overly skinny or fat. They were all ripped. So he does not have a control group for this experiment. Additionally, he also won't release the rest of the data. So again, I don't know how many swipes it took Chad to get all those matches. I don't know how many women also didn't respond. So there could be a niche that actually isn't into Chad and didn't respond. But everybody will just dismiss this as cope. But this is what politicians do, guys. They hide all the data and claim it to be scientific fact when in reality, they've hidden parts of the experiment. And this is academically dishonest. Let's talk about another flawed research methodology. I'm sure many people in this sphere are familiar with Xbox Live, a gaming service for all of us to play games on the internet with our friends. A lot of us had great times doing this, in our teenage years. And you probably remember on Xbox Live that people would make threats to snuggle your mother. There would be prevalent use of the N-word and other racial epithets. So Xbox Live, you could say that the behavior is quite different on Xbox Live than it is in real life, right? You don't see people going to the mall and making threats of snuggles with people's mothers or using racial slurs. So we can conclude that the behavior on a product that's targeted towards a specific demographic of end user is greatly different than the behavior of people in real life, right? So therefore, if I were trying to posit a study about the behavior of the average teenager or trying to extrapolate, make an extrapolation on overall human behavior, if I cited Xbox Live as my sample size, I would be laughed out of the scientific community, right? So you'll commonly hear inkwellTV, well, Tinder is real life, brother. Well, let's talk about how flawed that is too. So we also know that Tinder is designed for a specific end user within a specific income group and age range. And by the way, as Blackpill 2021 brought up, as presented by Statista.com, which is an unbiased website dedicated to gathering up statistics, the average user on Tinder is actually between 33 and 43 years old. So young women aren't the primary users of Tinder. Now, why is that? Because women are actually in their sexual prime, not their fertility prime. Their fertility prime is age 16 through 23. However, they are in their sexual prime due to hormonal changes in their early 30s through early 40s. So this should tell you why things are so skewed on Tinder. Not to mention, less than 4% of women in the United States have used Tinder self-reported. And I mean, again, there's going to be some noise in that, but we know that it's not a very large percentage. So if I were to make the same conclusion, if I were to make a study stating, hey, this is female nature, or this is an accurate descriptor of human behavior, it would be no more valid than if I were using the study from Xbox Live to describe, hey, this is the true nature of the average teenage boy. It's equally erroneous. So when you're looking at this through a scientific lens, keep this in mind. This also creates a serious problem with the BetaBucks theory, because I've commonly heard on in black-pilled spheres and inkwellTV and FACEandLMS posit that, when women reach their 30s, that's when they're out of their sexual prime and they wanna settle down, and that's when they get a beta male to be a BetaBucks. However, there is research that indicates that women are in their sexual prime, not their fertility prime, but in their sexual prime in their early 30s to early 40s, which would make sense as to why Tinder is most commonly used by women in that age cohort. So if women are settling down in their 30s, right, that wouldn't make sense. That's against their hormonal imperative. Their hormones are telling them, their libido is increased at this age. So the BetaBucks theory doesn't make sense. It's directly contradictory. And if women were really following their biological imperative to birth the most genetically fit offspring, then they would be rushing to have children between 16 and 23, in their fertility prime when they give way to the most healthy offspring. And we know that every year over the age of 35, the risk of birth defect increases. So this just doesn't make sense, and it's very inconsistent. And what I find ironic is that they commonly tout, it's just science. It's science, man. But it's really pseudoscience because the real facts show that this actually doesn't make sense. So, to conclude and keep us academically honest here, I've made us a little list that if you follow logic of things we can conclude and things that we can't conclude. And what that means in science, right, we try to find the best supported by data, the best answer supported by the data, right? Nothing is really proven in science. It's the best supported answer with the data we have and what we know. Science is always open to revision in light of new evidence, and a theory that was well accepted in the past can be completely destroyed, in light of new evidence. So I ask you to keep that in mind when looking at the next slide. Anyway, without further ado, let me show you, from an academically honest perspective, what we can and can't conclude. And I think what's important to note here is that in science, it's okay to say we don't have all the answers. And something such as human attraction, while I agree looks are a major part of it, we don't have all the answers. And using something such as Tinder, right, you can say, okay, well, on Tinder, what you have proven is that on Tinder, looks are everything. However, there's scientific research that says one of the most important factors in determining a mate to humans is scent. You don't have scent on Tinder, so therefore it's not a natural environment. All the variables aren't there. So using that as a descriptor of human behavior and mate selection is very flawed. Anyway, let me show you the last slide. So, using logic and power of observation, as well as what the data tells us, these are some things that we can conclude based on the data available to us, right? So looks do play a role in attraction. On Tinder, Chad is significantly more successful than the average man. Xbox Live and Tinder are small, skewed sample sizes that cannot be used to extrapolate human behavior. We don't know all the factors to human attraction. Human beings are sexually dimorphic, and we need to do more research and account for more variables before we're able to determine all the factors in human attraction. Now, this is where I ask you to be scientific and apply logic when determining your views on life, right? Now, as I've always said, the people who are set in their ways are set in their ways, and there's no changing them. If you want to accept this ideology, that's fine. Maybe that data is more convincing to you, but to the people who are new to all this pill stuff, this is where I want to really be academically honest and ask you to to think before swallowing a pill per se, right? So these are things that, given the data, right, the logic will break down, and when put through the rigors of science, they don't stand up, which is, of course, the great irony because FACEandLMS and inkwellTV state that what they're positing is absolutely science. But from what I've just shown you, right, from the logic we've just gone over, these do not stand up when put through the rigors of scientific testing. There are plenty of flaws and holes in these experiments. So, this is what we cannot conclude, that looks are the only factor in attraction. In real life, sub-8 men are not seen as attractive. That Tinder experiments prove an 80-20 rule. They do not. That we have enough predictive power to predict future relationships. That sexual dimorphism only refers to appearance and not behavior as well. And that we know all the factors at play in human attraction and mate selection. And I think if you're being honest with yourself, we have a lot more work to do before we come anywhere close to being able to predict anything like that. Thanks for watching my video, guys, and I'll see you next time.